This episode of This Agile Life has been brought to you by BrilliantAgile.com, providing Agile and Scrum training, consultancy, and personnel.
BrilliantAgile.com. Done right, it's brilliant.
Released on Sunday, July 3rd, 2016.
This Agile Live, episode 111.
You can't reason with a methodologist.
The software industry transforms more and more every day. Agile methods are quickly replacing traditional ones. The question is, are you agile enough? This podcast is devoted to agile and lean software development. Time to welcome your agile coaches on This Agile Life.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Sextro. Joining me this episode, we have Craig Buchek.
Hello. Contrary to the rumors, I am wearing pants.
Oh, there was a rumor about that, eh? I think I started that rumor.
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds like me. Craig also with us, our good friend Jason Tice.
Hi, John and Craig. What are you both trying to improve this evening?
Oh, you're back on that opening line now?
Oh, yeah, it's all about continuous improvement, and I'm glad to be back. Sometime we'll tell the story of what it's like to do 9 events in 6 weeks, and really cool. I want to say thank you to many of the listeners I met. I had a chance to meet and work with over 1,400 different people at 9 different live events in April 2016 and May 2016. So it's a cool story. So, but thank you to everyone I met and I had a chance to hang out with recently. So,
well, Jason, let's make it 1,401 by welcoming our special guest tonight, Dave West. Hey, Dave.
Hi. Hey, John. Hey, Craig, Jason. Good to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. And for all of our listeners, Dave is the current product owner of Scrum.org. Dave, what's that all about? What is it? What's entailed with being the product owner of Scrum.org?
I don't like the way you said current. That was a little bit worrying. Made me think that I was going to lose my job or something.
I'll revert back to my old description as new since October product owner of Scrum.org.
Yeah, so I'm the product owner at Scrum.org. So can you imagine a life where your primary stakeholders one of them is Ken Schwaber, one of the creators of Scrum. Pretty much my job is it's got a number of different levels. Primarily, my job is to care about the future of Scrum, keep it relevant, keep it up to date, and to build an organization around that has enough money to keep it vibrant and keep it up to date. So I help run Scrum.org, our community of 164 professional Scrum trainers, the training materials, the assessments. Over 1 million people have taken our online assessments, which is a pretty staggering number. I obviously working heavily on some of the new stuff, which I hopefully will have a chance to talk about today, and generally trying to keep Scrum there, trying to keep it relevant and vibrant.
Seems like you're doing a good job of keeping it relevant. We certainly hear a lot here about Scrum, but it sounds like you have your hands quite full.
Well, working with Ken and I get to see Jeff quite a bit as well. Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of, it's funny because obviously both of them defined product owner being the only person that can, sort of take control and own the thing. It literally owns the product if you consider Scrum as a product. And then, Ken's like, well, I'd like to do this. And I have to say, hang on, there's only one product owner, Ken. You said it. And he's like, damn it, you caught me out again. So yeah, it is an interesting job. And actually, this year in particular, it's a pretty important year for Scrum. 21, which in America, which I know from my accent you wouldn't guess, but I actually live in Boston. Very near Ken. He actually lives in Lexington. So in America, 21's an important birthday, and we think it's a pretty important birthday for Scrum.
So Scrum can start drinking now.
Yeah, I think it has been on the lowdown. I think it actually has been drinking quite a lot beforehand, sort of, at parties and things. But yeah, legally it can go. And order a glass of wine in a restaurant and not have to use its fake ID.
Hey, Dave, what's the date? Do you know the date of when Scrum was?
So I know the month, August. So it was Upstart in Texas, and Jeff and Ken basically did a presentation which called it Scrum, called out a lot of the stuff we see today. Not exactly the same, but virtually the same. It hasn't changed much, actually, because we're actually having a lot of conversations. There's a webcast on the 6th of July with Jeff and Ken presenting about some changes to the Scrum Guide. I can't tell you what's in it because I don't want to, sort of wreck the whole season for you, as it were, tell you who does what, But
no spoilers.
No spoilers, I'm afraid. I've been sworn not to, but because of that, we've been having a lot of conversations. Jeff, Ken, myself, a few other people about the sort of evolution and the history of Scrum, and it's impressive how little has changed in those 21 years. Obviously the concepts around empirical process, the ideas of the sprint, the ideas of the backlog, all of those mechanisms have pretty much stayed intact, and some of the peripheral stuff has changed a little bit around that. Sort of refinement has been in and out, and things like that. Grooming, it was called. Things like that have changed, but generally the essence of Scrum has stayed pretty much there, which attests to its goodness, maybe it's its power, maybe, I don't know. So it's interesting that August is the date, so it's a sort of summer baby, as it were.
And Dave, do you guys have a big celebration planned for August?
Yeah, no, we've been talking about that a bit because we're also doing an office refit. Funnily, our office is actually in the building where Jeff and Ken tried it. They didn't actually tell anybody they were trying it. In fact, I think they actually lied about what they were doing. It was probably called it something SSADM or some other, or Rational Unified Process or something. And they sort of lied and just did it without telling their customer because, last thing they wanted to do was tell that person. So, and that's where they tried all these ideas and failed horribly at some and learned a lot about others. And it's actually in the same building in Burlington, which is just outside Boston. And we're just doing a refit of the offices. So it's interesting so we're talking about a party for that because, new carpet, you should always have a party just to wreck it so that you have to buy some more carpet a few days later. But yeah, so we're actually sort of trying to combine those things. So yeah, it would be fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah, sure would. Well, why don't we dive into some Scrum conversation, and I'll throw it over to Jason. I know he's chomping at the bit to throw some Scrum talk your way, Dave.
I've done some copious notes in advance because Dave, when I heard we were going to, I said, and John said, product owner of Scrum.org. I said, oh my goodness, that is a question that I have been asked multiple times in the last, I want to say 6 weeks, especially as I've been out at a bunch of conferences, which is, could you explain the difference between your role at Scrum.org and then also the Scrum Alliance? And is that one and the same? Is it two entities? And what's going on there? Because people have approached me because they're confused.
Yeah, and that's a fair confusion because it's an interesting history, and I'll try to describe it in a way that everybody broadly understands. So the Agile Manifesto was signed. We all remember that. And after the Agile Manifesto was signed, interestingly, I was the RUP product manager when the Agile Manifesto was signed. So Grady, who I worked with, was invited, and we were so arrogant that we said, oh, those rad guys, what do they know about software development? God, how wrong we were. So it just shows you, doesn't it? Anyway, but when the Agile Manifesto was signed, there was loads of emails afterwards to Ken and the gang about needing to create something. So Ken created, with some others, the Agile Alliance in 2001. Realized that wasn't a great way of managing innovation, the way it was structured, etc. And so he then, in 2004, created Scrum Alliance with the mission to really continue to innovate instead of just on Agile generally, but on Scrum, use Scrum, create a commercial model around it, which he did very successfully with the CSTs and the mechanisms around that, Scrum Master and the like. Now, the Scrum Alliance grew. He created a beast, as it were, a good beast, but it grew. And it grew to such an extent that it wasn't really focusing on the things that Ken was interested in. Now, you guys probably know Ken. You've met him a lot. And he's very, very interested in software development and the profession of software development. Scrum Alliance was moving into more general management thinking, the application of Scrum in all sorts of domains, all very interesting and valid, but not around software development. He also was maniacal around assessment. And so he really wanted to decouple the assessment vehicles from the training for many reasons. One, because you shouldn't have to. Maybe you're in a country that doesn't have access to training. Maybe you're, in a state in your life where you can't afford to go on training. You shouldn't have to go on a training class to be certified in something. Instead, you should have to demonstrate knowledge. So he wanted to decouple the assessments, and the business model around Scrum Alliance wasn't really built for that. Some really, really, really good trainers doing their thing. They were like, oh, hang on a minute, that challenges how I do my job, etc. And so, coupled with the maniacal focus on software development, which wasn't in the interests of Scrum Alliance, in 2008, he left Scrum Alliance. Unfortunately, had a bit of a bike accident, which sort of created the timing, as it were. He had a lot of time sitting around with his legs up, as it were. And he created Scrum.org really with the focus not on this general sort of Scrum stuff, even though it's very Scrum oriented in the title, but more around the profession of software development and, dare I say, delivery now, the improving that profession. And so, one of the very first classes and associated certifications that we concentrated on was professional Scrum developer. And that was it's technical. It basically brings back the XP stuff that was very, very clear in the first books and throws it into Scrum in a lot more effective, a lot more, sort of transparent way, and assesses that afterwards. And then obviously PSM, PSPO and the like. And when you look at some of the innovations we're taking on now with Nexus and Scale Professional Scrum, some other things which maybe I'll talk about later, they're very software centric. And it's funny, DevOps has sort of come along almost because we haven't been software centric in our pursuit of done. We believe people have sort of looked at potentially shippable, potentially as an opportunity to abuse it horribly. No, we mean shippable. The reason why we say potentially is because the product owner can decide, not because the software don't work in production. The idea that actually you can only release, we treat, the sprint review as a phase gate. What the hell? No. It's a way of inspecting and therefore adapting on that sprint, and that sprint cadence. Those sort of mistakes have sort of crept into our industry, and ultimately we're trying to sort of focus on getting rid of those, and DevOps is as a result probably of as the Agile community and the Scrum community of fixing that concept of done. So Scrum.org is very focused on software delivery. It's very focused on proving it and the profession, improving the profession of software delivery, and that's why we exist. Scrum Alliance, awesome people doing some awesome things, very much more focused on the world of work. So, management in the broadest sense. And I think that differentiates us and allows us to provide value to the market, both organizations. And we still talk, Scrum Alliance support the Scrum Guide, which is not part of Scrum.org, but we provide infrastructure for it, and that's owned by Jeff and Ken. We're friends. Manny, whenever he comes to Boston, we go out for dinner, and he entertains for an evening. So it's all goodness. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, it actually does, and I appreciate it because it's actually interesting. And I'll call it one of the controversies in the Agile community that happened earlier this year was when the Agile Alliance, they organized the inaugural Agile Technical Conference down in Raleigh, North Carolina in April 2016. And they had a matrix they posted of like topics, and like Scrum was a banned topic for discussion at that conference because just like you mentioned about Scrum.org, this was the Alliance's effort to redirect focus back to technical practices.
Yeah.
So very, very much the whole thing there that the Alliance is doing with that conference and all the stuff associated with it is very much what I'm hearing aligned to the focus of Scrum.org.
Yeah, and that's exactly. I mean, it's funny. Look at our PSTs, but 160 odd of them, and number of them, probably over 30 are MVPs. The Microsoft Most Valuable player, I guess. It's I want to call them programmer, probably is what I want to call it, but I'm sure it's something more American and sport analogous. But it's interesting that these are very technical people, and and even though my bias is more of a Java type, and we get into very heated philosophical debates, less so than we used to about that. They're very technical. We talk about technical practices. We talk about code smells, TDD. We argue about BDD. We, the usual kind of stuff that you'd expect. And that doesn't mean we don't have people in our community that are more managerial oriented, but that technical sort of part of our story is very strong, and we're investing in that. And doesn't it disappoint you guys that people have more definitions of done, than Eskimos have of snow? When you say to a software engineer, is it done? They say yes, and you say, "Oh, I'm going to release it to production." They say, "Oh no, it's got to go through system security testing. It's got to go through." Oh my God, no, we haven't. Even though we are using container technology, obviously that isn't productionized containers. Ops is going to have to completely decouple that and put it into all sorts of different models and the like. No, we can't release to production yet. You're like, "Well, is it done?" "Oh no, it's not done. Okay, I get it. No, I don't really." So it sort of disappoints us, and I think to some extent it's these engineering practices that you talked about, and they're very evident in our professional Scrum developer materials and assessments, and to teach that you have to be able to write code. That doesn't mean everybody that goes on PSD has to be able to write code. It's a sort of team kind of activity. People self-organizing, obviously, so people to their strengths. But code and development and the like are key parts of that.
I'm happy to hear that there's a renewed focus on the engineering practices. It seems like there's a trend right now in the industry focused on renewing the hope within the engineering practices and reinvigorating the fire that we once had with XP around engineering practices, Dave. So is there more you can tell us about?
Yes, actually, there's a couple of things. So at Scrum.org, there's a number of initiatives that we're working on at the moment. Some of which are out in the public domain. Nexus and our Scaled Professional Scrum, which is basically providing guidance to organizations that are trying to get teams of teams to work together up to a certain point. Interestingly, we did a lot of research. The reason why we didn't release as quickly as some of our friends in the other communities have released around their scaling approach is because we wanted to harvest practices and see how people are doing. And it was interesting that there's a finite size of organization of when everybody's working on the same backlog, when everybody's working on the same product, we about 100 people, give or take, is about as many people as you can get, so about sort of 9 Scrum teams, 10 Scrum teams is about as much as you can get. And otherwise it starts becoming incredibly ineffective. And it's funny when you look at then what you do. Well, it tends to be engineering and architecture practices rather than organizational planning practices that become very relevant. We call it Nexus Plus. So the ideas around, guess what? A product line architecture. Guess what? High cohesion, low coupling. No surprise, cohesion and coupling doesn't just apply to great software. It describes the building of great software. If you can get that sort of those mechanisms in place to reduce the coupling between the dependencies and between the teams, then you start building great software. Technical debt, well, yes, no surprise. As you scale, technical debt becomes a nightmare because it's like walking through treacle, or what do you call it, molasses here, don't you? Don't know why it's differently called in America. Strange, but it's just sort of like all these sort of things become relevant. So as part of this sort of scaling thing, and with Nexus and Nexus Plus and the ideas around that, a lot of good engineering practices are coming into it. We've realized that actually we're having to think a little bit more about how we get done, as it were. So Ken has been thinking about this a lot, and we've been working with some of the people on this, and the idea of an SDK. Now, hang on a minute. A software development kit, right? That's what an SDK is. Well, we're using a pun, a literal Scrum development kit. The idea is that it's the embodiment. It's everything that you need to deliver working software. It's the infrastructure, as it were, to produce working software. And it really focuses on three things: principles, practices, and tools with environments and infrastructure around it. We think it might be an artifact that organizations can use that can embody the necessary mechanisms to deliver done working software effectively across multiple teams.
And can I ask, how is that different from just any of the commodity platform as a service offerings that are out there now?
It's approaching it from a slightly different point of view.
Okay.
I mean, because the problem with tool vendors, which is where all of this is coming from, and they're doing a fabulous job, Pivotal, Bluemix, are doing all that. All the PaaS vendors doing a fantastic job. They're concentrating on their own tools. And yes, they are providing a lot of that, but they don't, like there's some other practices to get teams to work together, for instance, to effectively deliver done software. So a principle might be ensure visibility across teams of dependencies. How do you do that? Well, a practice might be a shared backlog. That's a pretty sensible practice. And a tool might be Jira, maybe. So sorry, big fan of Jira, but sometimes when you've got multiple teams working in it, it can get a little bit wood for trees kind of thing. But so the bottom line is trying to think about it more broadly than just, all right, here's some build scripts, all right, here's a container structure, all right, here's some protocols, all right, and here's an idea and it's SaaS, great, have fun, go off, enjoy. It's more broader than that. It's trying to, and maybe this won't fly, maybe it will, but having some artifacts, something in place that helps us think about that. It's certainly become very evident when we look at implementations of Nexus, when we look at teams working together effectively, trying to deliver working software at least at the end of each sprint. And that's integrated software. Yeah. It appears that they need something to help them glue this together. And the term that we coined was SDK, pun was intended, and we'll see where that goes.
But I'll ask an open question. Is that where Scrum.org is like targeting to do a go-to-market where you would go to Scrum.org and you would get I want to call it a full-blown solution, which includes the ability to, number one, integrate with any of the commodity PaaS platforms that are out there, but also to do all the other, I want to say, kind of integration and dependency tracking activities that are necessary, like you said, to release code, but are not in the technical components of all the PaaS solutions that are currently in existence?
I mean,
I'm just asking.
Ken, basic bloody hell. I mean, Ken's like, yeah, that's what we should provide. I'm a little bit less keen on that. Hence the arguments with who's the product owner anyway. But what's interesting about this is that Scrum.org is a community. It is a training, like we use community-driven development using Git and GitHub to develop the training materials, to continually innovate them. Ken reviews them and has the final say, but ultimately they're being built by this community of 160 people or refined by this community. So it's training and it's assessment, a vehicle for, proving that the people understand the knowledge, that's represented in the training materials, but also often broader than that and in the Scrum Guide, etc. And then we support the Scrum Guide just from an infrastructure sort of point of view. that's what we do as a business. That's what we, as an organization, as a mission. Now, the problem with, so what you're describing is something much broader than that. Yeah. It requires us to be a software company, really, a real software company. And, I was a chief product officer at a company called TaskTop, and that's where I was until I joined Scrum.org. And so I know what it takes to build, a software company. And, we managed to get funding. I saw it grow from 10 people to almost 100. I've been through that, and it's a really exciting journey, but Scrum.org isn't that. What I think we can provide, though, is we can provide a mechanism to get community to start working on this in a way, gluing these things together. We can provide, as we did with Scrum, a lightweight, because I'm not a big advocate, even though I was the product manager of RUP, of these hugely comprehensive methodologies. As soon as you become very, very prescriptive, you have to then continually grow it, because it's not quite the same in this company or this company. So we have to provide a lightweight framework that allows effectively these things to evolve and be created, because they are missing. It's so hard to deliver done working software, particularly at scale, particularly when you've got multiple teams working on it, particularly when it needs to be robust, it needs to be secure, it needs to be changeable, it needs to manage technical debt in an effective way, it needs to evolve appropriately, but it also needs to change quickly. All these things are hard. And so we need to provide some of the glues. And maybe it's initially just a framework thinking about this. Maybe it's a mechanism for getting people to talk about this. For instance, let's talk about release management. All right. So I'm going to talk about Circle CI. I'm going to talk about Jenkins. Oh, I'm also going to talk about Electric Cloud. Oh, I'm going to talk about, hang on a minute, is that release management? Don't know. Is it? The idea of principles, practices, and then tools on top of that gives us a mechanism to put some structure to it, because at the moment it's a mess, and I think that's our role, and to build a community and to partner and build some bridges with these vendors to allow people to start discussing this in the context of releasing working software every sprint. Anyway, does that make sense? So the answer is kind of yes and no.
It's funny. Yeah. What I'll just share, if you're not aware, the organization I work with, we work with a lot of different government agencies here in the United States. And in government, public sector, there's actually a common pattern emerging to have what a lot of times they call it like a common development environment, which if you're a supplier, you're a vendor, you'll be mandated to use by acquisition policy in a contract. But they solve the problem, I guess I was just asking about, because you get access to this environment, and it will have a tool like Jira to do issue tracking. It will have tools to do, dependency management, link to architecture repositories. It will have a PaaS solution like Cloud Foundry, and it's all there. And you just log in and use it and do your work, and it's great, actually. So I guess I'm sharing that in public sector, there's been some work done, really with our tax dollars here in the U.S. to build those things. And having had the privilege to actually work in environments with that, it's great, actually, because you show up and on day one, all that stuff you used to have to do to get ready to write some code, commit, and push, it's just there. Oh, and by the way, we included a nice Jira template that, sets up your stories so it's easy to look and see parity across teams. So I just think it's cool, and it's neat to hear that your approach that you're recommending from Scrum.org aligns to things that I've seen, again, here in the States, public sector organizations already make significant investments in.
So it's funny because at TaskTop, one of the most important things when you're growing, you get your VC money. Obviously, you waste $1 million of it on a new website, a fancy new logo and all that. But after that, no, obviously we didn't do that at TaskTop, but some people do. Then after that, the dust settles and you start hiring people. One of the most important single things that you can do with a developer is push some production code within AX. Is it a day? Is it 2 days? Is it a week? And you do that via pairing. You do that via lots of things. So what we did at TaskTop is we built basically some of the stuff, we built using Confluence. This is how you do it. This is how it fits with Jira. This is the story kind of thing of how, and this is how it all works. And you could very quickly do it, but there was big gaps in it. So yeah, it's, I think we need to do that. And, part of me thinks, is it because, there's a lot of mediocre developers in the world? No, actually, it isn't. It's because it's so bloody hard, particularly when you get teams of teams. when you get quite complex stacks, when those stacks, not everybody knows everything about everything, as much as we sort of have the sort of almost romantic notion that a team of 7 to 9, your Scrum team people can actually know everything necessary to deliver working software to production. That is a little naive, I think, or romantic. The reality is it's a lot more complex than that. So if we can embody that in a way that allows them to rapidly deliver working software, even just the definition of done, a consistent definition of done. How many of your customers, how many of your situations do you have a consistent definition of done across multiple teams? A baseline that you can all then just, sort of maybe you specialize and add additional things. You're like, oh, well, no. In fact, how many times do you even find a blooming definition of done? You have to sort of uncover it, in your own. It's atrocious. And then implementing that, it's a bit of a mess. And I think that's one of the things we're very keen on doing, because I think that we need to help that. And it's, maybe it's a connection with the craftsman movement. Maybe it's a connection with organizations like our friends at GitHub. Stack Overflow, maybe it's another, maybe we can build, because we're mission based, we have the luxury of being able to build these bridges without saying how much money is in it for me. Maybe we can start doing some of these things and start helping developers deliver done. That's pretty much all I really want to do.
If you've listened to more than a few of our more than 100 episodes, you know that we don't often read commercials on the show, and this episode's no different. But I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our supporters that joined our private Slack channel. On our private Slack channel, the hosts of This Agile Life talk with our supporters about our daily challenges as we continue living our agile lives. In this episode, I would also like to personally thank Stefan Martinov. Stefan started supporting the show back in September 2015. Stefan, thank you for your support. We feel honored that you listen to the show. If you want to join Stefan in our private Slack channel, go to thisagilelife.com/community. One of the things I see when I'm out consulting and working in industry is that even if they have a definition of done, it's always different. Everybody has a different definition of done. Whether they're trying to game what done means so they can call something finished before it really is or what. But there's so many of these things that we have to have conversations around as we're just trying to deliver working software, that if we could just agree upon a base level for a lot of these things, it would take them off the table in terms of even having to have the discussion. So having something like this that's sort of a blueprint that you can use that says, we're using this, it comes with a baseline set of things, and let's build on top of that from there. That'd be a good way to get people started. And
then you inspect and adapt on it. That's the whole point. Gives you a start point, you get going, and it's fine. And yes, in some organizations, in Bank of America and Fidelity Investments, etc., you'll have these, and they'll be unique to those environments, but there might be some overlap as well. And yeah, because John, you've got a lot of test experience, right? You're a bit of a tester. That's not an insult, by the way. I mean that out of love. So I can imagine it must frustrate you massively when all these organizations have such variety of definitions of done, right?
Sure, of course, yes.
Because as a tester, you're trying to get consistency. You're trying not to be this massive overhead. And so the best way of doing that is a clear and concise definition of done, and then everybody's on the same page, at least at the start. So
can I ask a question about that? I'm gonna channel my inner Amos here. Amos is another one of our hosts on the podcast too. If you haven't listened to our prior episodes, Dave, he has in the past been very, I will say, critical of some Scrum practices. And in particular, something I know that Amos believes very strongly in, because Amos and I have gone back and forth kind of debating pros and cons of Scrum on this podcast, is how sometimes Scrum's desire to push towards standard practice. And again, what you're saying right here, this idea of we have a standard definition of done across all our teams. Some would say that challenges the autonomy of a self-managing team. And,
it does.
And my role, I'll share, I run a business innovation and ideation practice. And so I have even very recently been out doing ideation sessions, attempting to help organizations define a common definition of done, and development teams will put their that won't work for us. We're different than that team over there, and so we don't care that they have that. We're not doing that, and they get up in the room and they almost walk out. So in an environment like that, what would you do to promote this idea that we need to start to align to some standards to control the complexity of our environment?
So it's really, really interesting. So there's two ways of dealing with that. One way, which I did when I was the RUP product manager, that's a complete failure, and one way that I think has been very successful with Scrum. So when I was the RUP product manager, people said two things to me. They said, this is brilliant, but we're building mission critical, embedded, DoD centric, heat seeking specialist systems. So we need some content in it. And I would say, because I was the product manager that liked to say yes, I would say, yeah, give me some content, we'll add it to the RUP. And then another guy would come to me and say, RUP's so big and so complicated, I don't know what to do with it. Now, those two things were massively, I was annoyed, bipolar, I don't know. I was having this complete sort of like breakdown every meeting that I had with customers, because I had these two very different things. I always urged to put things in to add more and more complexity. Scrum's done the exact opposite. And actually, this is an interesting sort of dynamic of Ken and Jeff. Jeff is definitely at it kind of guy. He's incredibly smart, and both of them are, but he's got, we should add this. This is really good. This is a fantastic, a set of ideas. Let's add it to Scrum. I think it makes sense. Refinement or grooming, as it was known. Yeah, so we should always do this and this and this. And Ken always pushed back and said, look, what we need to do is provide a framework, not a methodology. And you need to provide just enough to allow people to work together so they can get into an environment and a cadence that allows them to inspect and adapt and to get feedback. So we just put enough. That's all, just enough. In the same way as at a sprint, we always just do enough to deliver on our sprint goal, ensuring that we deliver on a definition of done. But we don't, gold plate, shiny apples. We don't do those sort of things. Now, so that means, So taking that sort of context, we need to provide a mechanism that provides just enough. It doesn't need to be the most comprehensive thing. And it could start just with principles and practices. Most people, at least from a principle point of view, accept certain principles, that these are the bare minimum so we can work together. It's called a society. You have to have a set of rules to allow you to work together. You can't. Actually, in America, it's a little different. I was going to say you can't just buy a gun and go off shooting it, but you really shouldn't.
I don't know if this is we could turn to we could do a political podcast if you want to.
No. But no, I'm not saying it's bad or good. But there's certain things you just don't do. For instance, I can't walk around with absolutely no trousers on. In Germany, totally fine. Here, no chance. So my Speedos cause issue. I'm not totally sure why. But the point is that there's certain norms and there's certain things you have to conform to. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has to conform, because there's certain situations where you literally have to, maybe there's a reason why you have to. I'm doing a triathlon. I'm going to have to wear my Speedos, out in public. That's a situation that's slightly different. Does that mean that the norm hasn't changed? No, but it means you do get these things. What we need to find in software development is a similar sort of set of principles and practices that we all have to conform to be citizens of this development, whatever it means, and then certain ones that maybe we specialize differently because of the uniqueness of our situation. But if we can get that framework in place, if it can be light enough to allow freedom whilst restrictive enough to ensure that there's not massive amount of waste coupled with, disconnection coupled with pain, then I think we're all goodness. And from my experience, there's two types of person, really. There's people that actually do have a legitimate criticism of something, and there's just because, those guys, well, I've always done it. No, we can't do that because, and frankly, it's sort of like the and but game. I don't know if you played this game. If you follow something with a but, then it's really problematic. You can always find these things, and we're engineers or we're craftsmen. Sorry, we're craftsmen, so we can always do that. If you try to always say "and," then it changes the whole dynamic. And ultimately, I think we have to get out of this. Well, I want to do it like this because that's just what I do, and instead say, "Hey, what is the minimum? Let's concentrate on that, and then try to build from there out, and then specialize as necessary." Anyway.
I'd like to pull Craig into the conversation here because as we were talking about the definition of done, Craig seemed to have a feeling, it sounded like, Craig, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, that starting with the definition of done harms the team's principles of self-organizing. Craig, is that a fair characterization of where you're headed?
I find a little concern, like Jason's case, where definition of done is set in stone for you, and it might be more complex than you need. But I understand there's a balance. Usually, the way I like to do is have something prescriptive, but make sure that you understand the principles behind it before you go changing it. I think the principles are really important to understand why we're recommending doing something a certain way. And if you want to do something a different way, you have to demonstrate that you understand the principles and before you can make an exception to the rule. And
so did you feel that Dave's explanation after that comment sort of satisfied your feelings about definition of done and self-organizing?
Somewhat. I think it's really a matter of how it's implemented,
The thing I tend to run into with teams and the concept of self-organizing is, yes, we self-organize about what we're going to do technically, how we're going to perform that technically, or how we're going to implement the solution technically. But because we're self-organizing, that doesn't mean that the team gets to self-organize itself back into waterfall. So where do you draw the line?
Yeah. And I think Scrum has that a lot more than, especially like XP, that people are claiming to do Scrum, but they're doing only portions of Scrum, and they've thrown out a piece of Scrum because they didn't understand the benefits, and so they just aren't doing those things. And so they come in and they're like, well, Scrum's not working. Well, if you took a look, they're not really doing Scrum anymore because they didn't understand some of the pieces and threw them out. Yeah. So there's this tension. There's definitely this tension of prescriptive versus self-organizing, and I don't know really how to draw the line because you run into trouble both ways.
You bring up a great point there, Craig, that I wanted to follow up with Dave about. And Dave, I guess the question is, or the comment here is that in my time, I've seen a lot of people out there talking about, well, Scrum says this and Scrum says that, and people who are operating, within a given set of constraints and are trying to do their best, but are either half informed or worse off, not half informed even. And they're out there telling people this is what Scrum is and this is how you should do it, and kind of giving Scrum a bad name. What is it that you're doing and the Scrum.org is doing to kind of maybe try to work with that?
So one of the we talked earlier, that's a really, really good question. We talked earlier about why does Scrum.org exist? And one of the things that Ken's been almost maniacal about is membership to our professional Scrum training community, our PSTs. We have a significant failure rate. We don't like to say failure. We like to say not ready yet rate, because, failure sounds like you'll never be. And that is, we hope, is rare. We find, some people aren't quite in the level of maturity or experience or even, or I don't want to say intelligence, but have that sort of knowledge that's necessary. So one thing that we've been very, very, very conscious of and very focused on is ensuring that the licensed professional Scrum trainers are consistent. So one of the rules is if you teach a PSM, PSD, PSPO, SPS class, it has to be the same class. You can't. It's very different to Scrum Alliance, where you're actually encouraged to create your own materials and deliver your own class in your own way. And that means, that you get different views. Funny, a large financial institution that is in the Boston area recently reached out to me and said, hey, I'm a little bit worried, this Scrum thing. Everybody says they're doing it, but I've looked at all these different teams and they're all doing it differently. And we did an assessment. We took some of the mechanisms that we have, our assessment vehicle, and I chopped it up a little bit and I gave it out. And it was just bizarre. The inconsistencies of people's knowledge of what should be in a backlog and what does a sprint review and, why we do a daily Scrum. It was all about velocity, burn down, and dare I say, status reporting. I'm like, no, it was very worrying. And, we can't fix the entire world but what we can do is we can be very clear on the people that are doing what we call professional Scrum, that they understand the values, that they have the mechanics, consistent mechanics are important, and that they have the experience that can do it in to base it on, the foundation to base it on. So we're trying to, and we continue to sort of like drive that, and assessments are important. Some things that are. So watch this space at Agile 2016. We're going to be making some announcements about, dare I say, a curriculum, dare I say, levels of assessment that allow you to start validating at least consistent terminology, at least consistent approach to Scrum, at least a consistency. And that, because you're right, I think it's very, very worrying, and it has devastated. You get 5 consultants in a room and they got 6 ways of doing Scrum, and that's not saying they're bad, but they just don't fit together. And that can be a serious challenge.
So I've got one other question for you. Are you the one that I'd lobby to change sprint to an iteration?
Dude, I had this process called RUP. You might have heard of it. It was the most popular process. I had groupies. It was a good time. And we had iteration in there. It's cool. Yeah, the phrase sprint is a little bit, it's exhausting, isn't it? Just even to say it. But it is, I doubt we'll ever get that. And Scrum Master is always going to be a Scrum Master, even though, yes, that Ken in his moments says, perhaps that was a mistake. But it's hard to change these things. I am the right person to lobby, or you can go on to you can go to scrumguide.net and you can, or .org, is it .net? No, I think it's .org. And you can actually change, there's a user voice and you can say, oi, and Ken and Jeff do read it. In fact, I read it and compile it and then give it to them to read. But the point is that the information is there, and you can lobby for things to be changed. Not promising they will be changed. The difference between a terrorist and a methodologist? You can reason with a terrorist.
Dave, we have way more questions and content, I'm sure, to share than we have time for the show. But so we're going to wrap it up here. Do you have any parting thoughts or calls to action for our listeners?
I guess. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure. You chaps are really fun to chat to. If we'd got beers and a long evening in a cold, wet pub in England, I think we could change the world.
Oh, guys. Absolutely. No question.
But I guess for listeners, I guess, just professional Scrum guys, actually Scrum's, simple, easy, but read the guide, remind yourself what it is, emphasize the principles. It's about empirical process. It's about transparency so that you can inspect and adapt. The reason why you have a daily Scrum isn't to do status reporting. It's about inspection and adaptation so we can get better on a daily level, on a daily cadence. The sprint review is about improving on that sprint level. That doesn't mean you can release software to production continuously. The sprint review is not a phase gate. Don't consider it like that. It is a mechanism to do that inspection and adaptation. It'd be ideal if that software is in production so you can inspect and adapt on that. Think about building your team, allowing it to be self-organized, allowing it to really deliver on that goal. Empower your product owner, support your Scrum Master. And then if you're working at scale, you're going to have to balance some of those flexible, dynamic natures with some consistency. Like we talked about the SDK today, it's a set of ideas. It's still early stages. You'll see more stuff on that coming out from scrum.org. These ideas are trying to get that balance, the balance that we manage with the Scrum framework. Hopefully we can now get that across architectures and across teams so they can build working software at least at the end of each sprint. That's probably all I'd leave you with. And, have fun, smile,
Great words to live by. Before we let you go, Dave, I want to give Jason a chance to tell us about something he's got planned for the near future here. Jason, you want to let the audience know what you've got going on?
Oh, I thought we weren't doing that. Okay. Well, no, I was just talking because I'm organizing Agile Coach Camp 2016 in St. Louis, Missouri. It's in October, October 14, 15, and 16, and we're in the process of finalizing details. So there's been a big hubbub. Hey, can I register? And our joke is not yet, but I'll go on record and say that I believe we have a venue that can probably host the largest coach camp we've ever had. So if you do want to join us in October 2016 for Coach Camp, I think we'll be able to find space for you. So our website is, we'll put it in the show notes, but it's www.STL Agile Open Space, which is an organization in St. Louis that was hosting, and you can get more information there. So hopefully we'll see you.
Our friend, our mutual friend, Ryan Ripley was tweeting at me recently saying, where's Jason? Where's Jason? What's going on with Agile Code Camp?
Yeah, Jason was busy.
Coach Camp, rather.
Jason did I went coast to coast in 6 weeks. Boston to San Diego, 9 events, 1,400 people. That's a story in and of itself. So Ryan will see you at Coach Camp. Leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, we've been speaking with Dave West, the product owner of Scrum.org. Dave, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Okay. Thanks, chaps. Have a great evening. It's been a pleasure as well on my end.
Great. Check out thisagilelife.com for these show notes and for all of our past episodes. Thanks for listening, and keep living this Agile life.
This Agile Life is brought to you by a community of Agile developers and coaches aspiring to spread the word about this groundbreaking approach to software development. Join us at thisagilelife.com/community.